Valeria Esquivel co-edited the special issue of the journal. She's the research coordinator on gender and development at UNRISD, and inside the journal she is the author of the article Power and the Sustainable Development Goals, a Feminist Analysis. Valeria will now explain to us where and how the gender dimensions are present in the SDGs.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. We all know by now that the 2030 agenda is broad, is ambitious in its 17 goals and 169 targets. It's universal as it applies to all countries, and it is comprehensive as it integrates the economic, the social, and the environmental dimensions of sustainable development. Is it good news for women? That's the question we will try to answer. To start with, I would say that one of the most significant characteristics of the agenda is its framing in terms of human rights principles. The President states very clearly that the new agenda is grounded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in all international human rights treaties. There are references to the indivisibility of goals and targets in similar terms as we speak about human rights, and that about the responsibilities of all states to respect, protect, and promote, although it doesn't say fulfill, human rights. Yet the agenda does not conceptualize the goals and targets themselves as realization of rights. And it could have, because it could have been linked to the right to education, to food, to health, to water and sanitation, to social protection, to education, to sexual and reproductive rights, or to women's rights. But the human rights principles are in the preamble, but not among the goals. The fact that there is a gender-specific goal 5, achieve gender equality and empowerment all women and girls, and its targets in goal 5 is a triumph of sorts, despite the fact that the women's rights are not part of the goal chapeau as it was initially proposed. Women's movements in particular know that having a gender equality goal in the agenda can ensure, can open the possibility at least, that governments are held accountable for the advances in this area. The targets for Goal 5 are ending all forms of discrimination against women and girls everywhere, all forms of violence against women and girls, and all harmful practices, ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, ensuring women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision making, and undertaking reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property. There is also a target on unpaid care and domestic work, which I will focus on in a minute. But before that, these 9 targets recognize women's oppression as grounded in structural forces and institutions, both public and private, and driven by deeply embedded power inequalities and discriminatory social practices. Yet, and there is again another yet, while Goal 5 is worded more strongly than the Gender Millennium Development Goal, it said, that one said promote gender equality, this one says eliminate gender inequality, which you see is far stronger. The targets, none of the targets are time-bound. They don't say by 2030 do X or Y. So big promises are made, but there is no obligation to actually achieve the goal by the given date, only to implement the means to eventually get there. So in a way, all these are process goals, things that should be happening towards achieving these goals and targets. It is particularly important that the target 5.4 included the recognition and value of the unpaid care and domestic work through the provision of public services, infrastructure and social protection policies, which brings in a crucial dimension of women's economic empowerment and of well-being, as well as an impediment of the full enjoyment of human rights. Without explicitly recognizing it, the target mentions the ways in which unpaid care and domestic work can be redistributed through public services and social protection policies, or reduced via improvements in social infrastructure. So the target wording avoids speaking about redistribution and therefore using that contentious, that would look like a contentious word, yet it gives full embrace to the triple R framework, which was fought for by women's movements. Gender equality is also mainstreamed across the agenda, with explicit mentions to women and girls in several goals. In Goal 1 on ending poverty, and also where it establishes social protection for all and the need for pro-poor and gender-sensitive development strategies. In Goal 2, focusing on nutritional needs of adolescent girls, pregnant and lactating women, and also in the goals of health, education and agriculture. Goal 8 mentions the full and productive employment and decent work for all women and men, and equal pay for work of equal value, which is a long-standing labor rights agenda for women. And complementing the target on unpaid care and domestic work, the section on infrastructure, there is Goal 6 and Target 1 says achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. So also it is possible to make a reading of the goals beyond whether they explicitly mention women, as we know that gender equality cannot be realized without realizing other dimensions of social justice, and that the reverse also holds. Distributive justice cannot be achieved without realizing women's rights. And here is where some caveats appear, as flagged by several authors in the issue. I will mention only 3 of those. The accountability mechanisms in the agenda, which look still vague, nation-based, and done on voluntary basis, while there are no mechanisms to account for international goals like the inequality between countries. That the agenda renews the emphasis on a traditional growth path, growth and industrialization path, which is necessary, but without being put within environmental boundaries, it might not challenge business as usual. And there is also concern, flagged by several authors, about the lack of funding for the SDGs. Where are the resources to fund and implement the policies that they are required? Also because the means of implementation that are written are still vague. The implementation phase that started January 1st this year will be the point at which the SDGs are going to be translated into concrete action in countries. The danger that the SDGs and targets which contain most potential for transformation could be neglected at the implementation phase is not small. Selectivity could lead to neglect the goals that address the need to challenge power relations, reform institutions, and achieve other changes in the structures of political, economic, and social life. National adaptation of an international development framework can also lead to the dilution of the ambitions of the SDGs, and in particular the gender goals. So are the SDGs good news for women? That is yet to be seen, and it is reflected in the fact that most of the authors have chosen to pose questions for the future as the titles of their contributions. So the value of the agreement on goals and targets, including the dedicated gender goal, Goal 5, will be revealed at their implementation, and that is an open story yet, and our work.